Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
City Hall reporter Joshua Fechter,
business editor and columnist Greg Jefferson,
investigative reporter Brian Chasnaugh.
And today we're going to talk about the state of Texas and its first week open for business, at least to some degree. Last week, Governor Greg Abbott issued an executive order which opened up retail stores, restaurants, movie theaters, malls up to a 25% occupancy. And this is a kind of an experiment that Texas and some other states are going through. We're going to see what effects this will have after we've gone through about a month and a half of social distancing and stay-at-home orders in response to the COVID-19 outbreak. It was clear that Mayor Ron Nirenberg was not real happy with this executive order, which superseded his mandates that people stay at home. But I think he's kind of walking this line. We can talk a little bit about that as the show goes on. But he's kind of walking this line where I think he's trying to maintain some kind of positive relationship with the governor while making it clear that he doesn't agree with it. Josh, you had some interesting tweets over the weekend where you were, I think, observing some examples of people not really following social distancing at all. I mean, what did you see out there?
So my girlfriend and I went to pick up some takeout orders from curbside pickup from Botica at the Pearl, and we just had that craving. We just had to go get those.
I hear
the sweet and sour Brussels sprouts. So like,
I hear a lot of hipsterism in that, but go ahead.
Yeah.
We're not judging you on this.
I'm judging you, but go ahead.
Well, that's kind of what I saw was a lot of hipsters at the Pearl. So we got there, we pull up, and I honestly, I really regret not taking photos of this, but I mean, there was a group of, I couldn't tell if they were a wedding party or, a sort of like a prom kind of get together. But I mean, it was at least a dozen people, it looked like, who were just kind of like hanging out in together in like a circle. There were people there who were kind of outside local coffee, sitting outside of the shop on like tables and whatnot. It's so like 4 or 5 people in a group, just kind of like seeing like huddles of folks all over the place. When we got in line for Botica, there were 2 people in front of us who didn't have masks on, who were ordering in line. I mean, I saw, maybe 1 in every 5 people had a mask, if that. And this is just sort of like one example, but I mean, it didn't seem like just from this one excursion that people were taking it that seriously there. I will say that at the liquor store afterwards, there were plenty of people wearing masks, and keeping their distance from people. So you'll see that at the liquor store, but maybe not at the Pearl.
I think that's one of the things that it seems to me that we've got 2 different realities going on. You got one group of people, and this may be the majority, because I mean, the polling shows that despite all the sort of loud protests against stay-at-home orders, that the majority nationally, and I think probably in this state as well, support the idea of staying at home. But you'll go to a store, you'll see people wearing masks. You see people taking this thing really seriously. At the same time, there were reports over the weekend about huge crowds at Port Aransas, people there at the beach, and not seeing me. And we have to think a lot of those people are from San Antonio. If there was some spread of the virus there, they're going to be bringing it back to San Antonio. We saw it recently in Lake Austin. You had a park ranger who basically got pushed into the water by somebody who was just mocking him for trying to keep people to maintain some social distancing. So they're just like kind of these 2 realities going on. And I think for people who are trying to handle this thing responsibly, it's been like extremely frustrating to watch other groups of people just some defying it or just not taking it seriously.
Well, I'm curious about, when you have the governor kind of easing restrictions and trying to, quote unquote, reopen the economy. I mean, that's going to have a psychological effect.
That's right.
I was out at several stores just kind of checking things out this weekend. I went to a Target, a couple of HEBs, another store. And for the most part, it looked like any Sunday afternoon, pre-pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it had to do with the fact that the weather was gorgeous. We've all been stuck indoors basically for about 6 weeks, and the
Right.
governor is saying this is okay. And most people I came across had masks on. Some didn't. There wasn't much social distancing going on.
Mm-hmm.
But I
So
think that it like in some kind of psychological way, people feel emboldened, or at least they did over
Right.
the weekend.
Did y'all see
venture
the
out.
coverage from health experts basically saying that there's 3 scenarios for the future?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what would be really helpful for people to realize is that all 3 scenarios put this through next year. I mean,
Right.
Mhm.
we're going to be in this. The virus is going to be out there circulating for into 2021,
Right.
and everyone's going to have to learn to live with this situation without potentially falling ill.
And that's the
And
challenge, yeah, because
yeah,
I don't think that anyone feels that we can completely shelter in place for a year. At the same time, it's what do we do? Josh Brodesky, our colleague, had a really good column over the weekend about what's going to happen if the school systems open up, in August, and how things are going to have to be different. Maybe they'll have staggered schedules and things like that. I mean, we're figuring this out as we go along. But one of the things that was interesting is that Greg Abbott clearly was not following the science. It was a political decision, saying it's just time to open business, and so we're going to do it. And the day before that order kicked in Texas, we had the largest number of deaths in the United States from the coronavirus that we'd had, nearly 3,000. Now, Brian, you've been writing about what we've been seeing locally, and from what I've seen, it seems that there is some encouraging news, at least in Bexar County, as far as with the numbers that we've been seeing. Is that right?
right. So I kind of had an epiphany last week when we hear about testing capacity, and we hear that Bexar County has the capacity to test 1,600 people a day, and you kind of naturally assume that we're hitting that ceiling every day because there's not enough tests, right? Because that's what we
Right.
keep hearing is there's not enough tests. In fact, we're not hitting that ceiling. There's a surplus of tests here because I think the number was 600 something last Tuesday. I believe over the weekend there was a 24-hour period where about 800 people got tested. So I mean, some of our Metro Health leaders are saying that that's an encouraging sign that fewer people, and that's been a decrease in the number of people seeking out the test. And we don't. One thing they're doing is they're putting out a community survey right now to try to understand why people, not as many people are seeking out the test. Could it be because they don't realize that those resources exist? Do they not have transportation? There could be any number of reasons. Hopefully it's because people aren't feeling sick.
One of the things is that I think we've seen here and elsewhere is that the mayors and the county judges who are dealing with this issue at close range have tended to be the most adamant about sheltering in place and trying to maintain social distancing, and the sort of pressure to open up for business again has tended to come more from people at the state and national level. And as I mentioned earlier, clearly Ron Nirenberg was not happy about the governor's executive order this past week. Where does this leave Mayor Nirenberg? I mean, what kind of power does he have to kind of direct what San Antonio does and our response to this outbreak?
Well, I was at the briefing last night, and he is continuing to urge people to wear masks and socially distance and stay home if you can. So his message hasn't changed. What's changed, I guess, are the teeth in his
Right.
directives. There's no teeth anymore. He can't.
But basically,
find them.
I mean, basically, what has happened is that, early on you had sort of cities and counties across the state basically having to enact these restrictions on business, stay at home restrictions, uh, while they were waiting for the governor to take some kind of action. There were calls early on for Abbott to enact a stay at home order. He
Mm-hmm.
finally did, but now the governor's sort of in the driver's seat on this, and you know dictating the terms of the reopening, what can open, what can close, and that's kind of left not just Mayor Nirenberg, but mayors and county judges across the state with little authority to determine it on that front. So now, I mean, tomorrow we're going to hear from Nuremberg and Bexar County Judge Nelson Wolf's uh, economic transition team. This was something that was put together by the two of them to look at. Okay, we're going to get this data from the health transition team, and we're basically going to give sort of recommendations on like when business can plausibly start reopening. We can determine that sort of by sector. Now that's kind of been
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of the right word.
Beside the point,
they don't
maybe?
they don't have that authority anymore to
Yeah.
basically say like, hey,
That's right.
here's when we can reopen. Now, basically, what their role is saying kind of like directly to businesses, hey, look, if you're in the a sector, these are our sort of recommendations for social distancing, when you can plausibly reopen, because remember, like, the governor's order says that you can reopen if you're a retailer, if you're a restaurant, but it doesn't say you have to. So I think they're
Mm-hmm.
kind of using that
Sure.
as a way to sort of maneuver and say, well, that's where you're going to see a little bit of difference, sort of sector by sector. They have that freedom to then move about in that.
We've in recent weeks there's been sort of more opposition to the shelter in place policies that we've seen across the country, and the protests have taken a couple of different forms. I mean, on the one hand, we've seen just really sort of angry mobs, at the state house in Sacramento, California. We've seen them in Michigan and in Phoenix, Arizona. And you've seen kind of a coalition of anti-vaxxers and gun rights activists, and they're kind of coming at it from the angle that this is tyranny and government's trying to take over control of our lives, and it's been about individual rights, and it's very much in the spirit of the Tea Party movement we saw a decade ago. There's also been this less rowdy sort of faction, which I think we saw, for example, in Dallas with the woman who runs a hair salon, and she decided, I'm going to open up even though I'm not allowed to, and she got a cease and desist order from the county judge, and she just ripped it up. And she's kind of coming at it from the angle of who's deciding here what is an essential business and what is not. It seems arbitrary when these government officials are deciding which businesses can open and which ones can't. Greg, I was kind of interested in your take on this. I mean, have you sensed within the business community just frustration over, not necessarily over the idea of social distancing, but over the way that the determinations have been made about what is an essential business and what is not an essential business?
Actually, I think that's lessened over time. I mean, we've been living now with kind of these definitions for about 4 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks of what's essential and what's non-essential. And in the beginning, I mean, the city and county were not at all clear on what truly was essential and what was non-essential, and there was a lot of confusion, and there remains that. But right now, I think retailers, what they're most interested in at this point is looking at what's happened since this limited reopening on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it turns out, and we're still reporting this out, so we can't say for sure,
right,
how much business was done over the weekend, but anecdotally, it seems like people people were out to much, to a much greater extent than they've been. I mean, if there are businesses that over the weekend were open and doing better maybe than they expected, and your business that decided to remain closed, the question is, are you going to be able to withstand looking at all of that potential business just fall by the wayside? I mean, it's just an added pressure on you. Yeah, and a lot of these retailers received paycheck protection program loans, which are only forgivable if you rehire employees you've laid off or maintain your workforce. And so they've got those terms that they've got to meet unless they want to repay the loan, and nobody does. So the pressure is only building for stores to reopen, and employers are taking that taking that to mind.
I'm not trying to psychoanalyze Greg Abbott, but just in general, when you look at that, the actions of governors around the country who have, I think, been eager to open up businesses again. How much do you think this is driven by the fact that when certain businesses open, their workers who've been able to apply for jobless benefits in recent weeks will now be in a position where if their business opens and they're saying, I don't feel safe going back to work, they're not going to be able to collect those benefits. How much do you think that just that the hard, cold fiscal analysis is going into this?
Well, I too am not going to psychoanalyze Governor Abbott. I'd be afraid to. I don't want to get in there to see what's up.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would point out that the Texas Workforce Commission, under guidance or direction from the governor, issued new rules last week. The thrust of it was if you're somebody 65 or older and you were laid off and you're being called back to work, if you have concerns about catching the virus, if you go back to work, you can stay on the sidelines and still receive your unemployment benefits. And to me, the surprising thing to that was kind of one of the addendums to the order, which was, and if you have a justifiable fear of going back to work and you can demonstrate it in some way, and it wasn't clear at all how you would demonstrate fear, but I mean that too, if you can manage to make that case, then you'll continue to receive your unemployment benefits. That was surprising to me. I did not expect that from the governor and from the TWC under Abbott.
Yeah, that's very interesting. On along those same lines, and I want to kind of wrap up this week's show on this issue because it's easy to forget that this is still an election year because we're dealing with so much on the public health and the economic front, and we've seen this ongoing battle in Texas, and it's somewhat of a national battle over how open mail-in voting should be this year because of concerns about people voting in person and with the spread of this virus. And the Texas Democratic Party has filed suit challenging the Texas election code, which puts very strict restrictions on voting or applying for a mail-in ballot. You have to be 65 or over. You have to have a disability. You have to be in jail or out of the county at election time. And the Texas Democratic Party is arguing that just fear about contracting the virus and the public health concern should be enough to warrant getting a mail-in ballot. So that as this battle plays out, last week we saw the Harris County judge, Lena Hidalgo, saying we're going to expand mail-in voting in the state. On Wednesday, we had a conference call between the Texas Secretary of State's office and county elections administrators, and the elections administrators were told, hey, if somebody says COVID-19, if they write that down as their excuse for wanting a mail-in ballot, put that aside because we still have to see how the legal battle plays out. But if they just write disability, you're not an investigative body. You can't really look into whether this is a disability or not. So accept that one. And within a couple of days, you had the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, saying disability is not an excuse for getting a mail-in ballot, and we don't. If local officials are encouraging people to put disability down as their excuse, we're gonna punish them for that. So there seems to be this kind of battle going on over how this is going to play out. I was just curious about you guys, just as voters, with the thought that there's an election coming up in a couple of months, and I don't know if you all vote in primaries. I mean, many people in journalism don't do that. But putting that aside, just the idea of having an election 2 months from now and dealing with this outbreak as we are, how comfortable would you all be voting in person?
Well, I think with the projections that we're seeing right now from public health experts, it'll be a heck of a lot easier to vote in a couple months than it will be at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So I mean, I see myself, if the wave truly, eases over the summer, I could see myself being comfortable going out with a mask and maintaining social distancing as best as I can. But if there's the second wave that everyone's predicting coming in late summer, early fall, that could be a real problem.
Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts about that?
Well, I'll just say I'm totally comfortable voting by mail.
Yeah.
That's fine. I mean, it's just, just because I don't have a problem with it. I wouldn't have a problem, voting through an app. I just think, just in general, the more avenues to vote, the better. I just, I know that, especially in the state of Texas, the Republican Party, they want to keep voting constrained. Like, what's the last thing the Republican Party in Texas has done to make it easier to vote? I just don't, that's just not my belief. So yeah, I'd be totally cool voting by mail.
And sorry for my awkward pause. I'm using the fact that we can now do this podcast virtually to look up stuff on my laptop as we're talking.
I think we were supposed to pretend that we're in the same room, but okay.
Are we?
Yeah. We broke the illusion, but we're okay with that.
Yeah.
If we're pretending that we're in the same
shattered the illusion.
I'm sorry. Our dear listeners, we are just coughing and screaming at each other.
That's right.
No, I was trying to say if there was a bump in cases after the Michigan Supreme Court elections a couple weeks back, but I can't seem to find that now. I'm not sure where I would land in terms of like my feeling safe in terms of in-person voting. I mean, I'll take a mail ballot. I'll do that. But doesn't voting on an app sound kind of nice? It just sounds so nice and easy.
Well, the thing about this outbreak is that on so many levels, economic, political, and various different ways, it's making us kind of rethink a lot of the things that people sort of took for granted in this society. And I think the way we vote is one of those things that we're having to reevaluate. So I think I'll wrap it up on that note, and thank you all for listening. Hope you all are doing well, and we'll be back next week. Take care.